Thank you for tuning in to Entertain the Geeky, your source for nerd news.
Hey guys, what's up? This is Jason back at you with more nerd news. So I figured in the traditional cliche that is end of year podcasts or videos, we're going to do this episode as a best of 2017 episode. So I'd like to talk about some of the things that in the various things we talk about on the show that I think, and again, this is just an opinion thing. And when it comes to video games and comics, it's really limited to things that I've read and played. But I'm going to do my own kind of best of 2017 list. So I'd like to start off with movies. And I'm specifically limiting this to movies that are within the geeky realm. So Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, Star Wars movies, the various other, Fox properties that have graced our screens. But I think I'm going to have to, for me, I'm going to have to give it to Spider-Man Homecoming. And before you jump down my throat about that, the reason I think Spider-Man Homecoming is one of the best Marvel Cinematic Universe movies to come out of 2017, in a year when we had Thor Ragnarok and Guardians Volume 2, which were both excellent movies in their own regard. We don't want to take anything away from what they were, but I think Spider-Man had a very hard job. Not only did it have to show the fans that Spider-Man has and always will be a part of this universe, it also had to shake the kind of the dust off of the Spider-Man franchise. I mean, we had 3 movies that were made with Tobey Maguire, and while I think the second one was a well-done movie, I was not a fan of the first and third one. And 2 movies done with Andrew Garfield, which, I mean, in my opinion, are not worthy inclusions in the Spider-Man franchise. They really didn't do anything new. They didn't take any chances. And I'm going to tell you, that is probably the reason I enjoy Spider-Man Homecoming so much, is that it really just took some chances. It really tried some new things. It tried to downplay the love story of Peter Parker and really make the wide-eyed teenage Peter Parker that the Ultimate Spider-Man comics had brought to us for so long. And we didn't get much story in the regular Marvel Cinematic Universe or the regular Marvel comic universe with child Peter Parker. I mean, when we meet Peter Parker, he's already in college, way back in Amazing Fantasy number 15 from 1963, and so we really watch Peter go through college and getting a job and trying to be an adult and balance his life as an adult with his life as Spider-Man. So I definitely think that in taking it back, which is what Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley did with the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, the movie really shined in that regard, and getting to show kind of a wide-eyed teenage Peter Parker looking at the world through fresh eyes. And yes, there is a love interest in Liz Allen in the film, but it never takes away from Spider-Man's desire to do more with his superhero persona. It is a part of his life. It is something that he values. But he wants to be a hero. He wants to be like these superheroes that he sees on television and that he hears about and that he reads about and that he sees in New York. I mean, honestly, Peter has lived in Queens his whole life, so this is something that he's watched evolve. And all of a sudden, he becomes one of these guys, and he just wants nothing more than to do right and to follow in their footsteps. And I think the movie just really, really does a fantastic job of getting all of that across in a short time, and reintroducing us to the Spider-Man that Spider-Man always should have been in movie form. John Watts and Tom Holland and all the cast and crew, I mean, they just did a fantastic job of not only bringing this world to life, but of bringing these characters to life in a new and fresh way that didn't feel stale or like it was just calling upon things from the past of Spider-Man stories in movie form. And Michael Keaton's Vulture, I mean, it's just, he easily is one of the most compelling Marvel Cinematic villains that we've had so far. Everybody goes with Loki and says that the Marvel villains are not as kind of big and grandiose as they should be, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that we've had some fine villains in Zemo and in Red Skull, and yes, they were one and done villains, but they still managed to bring a new take to those characters that we've come to know in the comics for so long. So for movies, for me, and in the year when Star Wars: The Last Jedi hit theaters, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and Thor Ragnarok, which were all excellent films. I think I'm going to give it to Spider-Man: Homecoming because I really just am excited to see Spider-Man done well. I'm really excited to see Spider-Man as a part of this larger universe, and I really honestly cannot wait to see what happens to his character going forward. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and head over to the comic side, and a lot of big things came out of 2017 in the comic world. And honestly, I would love if I, had the time and the money to read every single book that hits the shelf, but I just don't have that kind of luxury anymore in my life. But I think of all the things that I've read and that I've tried, you guys out there know I'm a big fan of Dark Knight's Metal, and I have really showed my appreciation for what they've done with that story. But I think ultimately, if I'm talking about something that just wowed me the most and just brought to me the hope for a better future for the comic world, it was the Marvel Legacy reboot. And I know, don't call it a reboot. It's not a reboot. We're just moving forward. It's a reboot. Let's be honest, fair and true. It is a reboot, but that does not mean it's bad. What Marvel Legacy managed to do was kind of softly relaunch their characters and do some things, continue on with some things that had already been being built, but do a lot of new things as well. I think that the one shot is quite intriguing. The Marvel Legacy one shot that kind of led into all of this, and as we've started to read some of the books, for me it's been Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man, with that is being written by Chip Zdarsky and illustrated by Adam Kubert. Spider-Man, which is Brian Michael Bendis' final project before moving over to DC. Mighty Thor, which is in the throes of the Death of Mighty Thor story arc, where it looks like Jane Foster will finally succumb to the cancer that has slowly been killing her over the course of this story. And honestly, the X-Men books, which, while they haven't had the same Marvel Legacy thing going on with their renumbering and stuff because they are new books, they're definitely fitting well within the vein of what Marvel Legacy is trying to do and kind of getting back to some classic stories. I mean, they're most recently obviously bringing back the Phoenix Jean, the original Jean, which is a huge thing, to kind of take it back to a place that we as fans remember it fondly. Captain America's a good guy again. He's not a Hydra agent. He never was a Hydra agent. There was always a part of him that remembered who he was and that was fighting to get out. And it did, and it defeated evil Nazi Captain America. Even though I don't think that Hydra and Nazis are the same thing. They do have the same, some similar ideals. But Hydra existed as an organization long before the Nazis and obviously continued to exist long after the Nazis. But I don't want to get off on a tangent. Marvel Legacy has done what DC Rebirth did before it, and you can say, oh, well, they just kind of copied off what they did. And while that may be true, it doesn't change the fact that that has been the history of comics almost all my life. I mean, the big publishers, especially Marvel and DC, they follow each other's footsteps. When they see the other company doing something that works, they try to follow in it. And honestly, I probably would have given this best of to DC Rebirth had DC Rebirth not actually started in 2016 and is really hitting its stride has really hit its stride in 2017. But I got to give it to Marvel Legacy because not only did they manage to bring a lot of readers that they kind of had alienated with Secret Empire back into the fold, but they started to do some interesting things. One of the big ones was introducing the character of Voyager, who, if you're unfamiliar with what's been going on currently in the Avengers books, we've introduced, kind of retconned the Avengers story and introduced a character that apparently has always been a part of every big Avengers story throughout the history of their run. We just forgot about her. So it's been interesting to see her kind of get reintegrated into old stories. They've kind of done some classic art style things and put her, placed her in those big moments from the Avengers comic history. And it's really, really fun. And I always love retconning. I always love the possibility that something didn't happen exactly as you remember it, or that new things can be introduced and characters can be different. I really, really am on board with this idea. They did a similar thing over in Guardians of the Galaxy with number 150. We're bringing back Adam Warlock. And truth be told, we're bringing back Adam Warlock at a time when we're getting to a place where the movies are going to start introducing us to some of those characters. But it doesn't matter. If you're like me and you remember Warlock and the Infinity Watch, you're very excited to see Adam Warlock come back to the screen or come back to the pages of the comic and get his due again. He is a character that we seem to have forgotten about, and he's a very, very important part of the Marvel Universe. He's a very important part of the Infinity Stone story, and I hope his coming back means we're building to something kind of interesting with him and Thanos, because they have always been the bitterest of enemies. So I want to switch over, and I want to go to the video game world. And again, this is relegated to things that I have played. I have not picked up a Nintendo Switch, so I have not played Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey, which obviously I've read and heard are just fantastic, fantastic games. And I will pick one up eventually because I have to play it. It's Legend of Zelda and Super Mario. I've been playing those since I was a child. But so for me, I have kind of been sampling from the PlayStation library, and there was a lot of big things. I mean, Horizon Zero Dawn blew people away. Assassin's Creed Origins came in late 2017 and blew people away. But I think the one thing that really, really stood out to me was Capcom's Resident Evil 7. And this is kind of going to be, the reason I like this is because of something else that I enjoyed. So a while before that, a demo had popped up on the PlayStation Network, and I think on Xbox Live, for a game called PT, which stood for Playable Trailer. And it was to be a Silent Hills game that Guillermo del Toro and Norman Reedus were working on. And I'm going to be honest, that was really, really intriguing. And the demo is fantastic. It's scary. It creates this sense of dread. And then ultimately, Hideo Kojima, who would have been the head of the project, departed from working for Konami, and the project is just dead. It didn't go forward. If you're one of the lucky ones who downloaded the Playable Trailer, don't ever delete it, because if you delete it, you will not be able to get it back. So Resident Evil 7, this is one of the reasons I think the Resident Evil 7 is just great, because it saw an idea and a chance to reboot its franchise, and it used that idea, and it turned the Resident Evil franchise into something scary again, something that can genuinely chill you to the bone. I mean, if you've played the game like me, you probably remember moments where you just didn't even want to go in that next door because of what could be beyond it. The house with the crazy Baker family stalking you through the corridors. I mean, it just creates such a sense of real dread in a player. And I can't even imagine putting on a VR headset and playing it in virtual reality. I would probably crap myself, because the game is scary enough just sitting. And there was many times I was sitting on the couch and my wife was just laughing at me because of the genuine fear I had at moving forward with the game's story. And if your game can create that much dread, that much real emotion in your players, you've done something great, and you've created something quite successful. Because honestly, I know I'm not the only one that had that feeling. I know I'm not the only one that carries with them the sense of dread at stalking around the hallways of the Baker estate. It is a genuinely chilling and scary video game. And if you have not played it, I highly recommend it, because it represents what is, clearly a bold new start for the series, kind of going back to their roots and trying to find what initially made people such fans of Resident Evil and the scary nature. And it only is heightened by the fact that they put the game in first-person mode, instead of the traditional Resident Evil over-the-shoulder kind of third-person thing that they have been doing since Resident Evil 4. Because if you remember Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3, they had those weird static cameras that would change as you moved through the environment. 4 and beyond kind of put the action right behind the player, so that the camera was moving based on your own movements, similar to traditional shooter games. And that's kind of what they turned Resident Evil into. It's just a traditional shooter, and that's not to say that those games were bad. 4, 5, 6, 7, or 4, 5, and 6, they're interesting for different reasons. If you're a fan of shooter games like Gears of War, and Splinter Cell, and even like Hitman, if you're the kind of player when you play Hitman, you just kind of run in and gun everybody down to get to your target. It definitely had a lot of that going on, but that's not why we fell in love with Resident Evil. And I think Resident Evil 7 brought us back to that place that we can love Resident Evil again for what it means, for its scary, crap yourself mentality when you're playing it. So that's for me the top video game of 2017, and I would love to hear what you guys think is the top video game, or any of the top categories of 2017 that I'm going through today. So I want to touch on one last thing in the TV side of things, because we always try to get the TV stuff in there as well, and there was a lot. We had some Netflix Marvel stories. We had Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., we had Gotham, we had Supergirl and Flash and Arrow and Legends of Tomorrow, and a new Tick series from Amazon Prime. I mean, there was all of these things that were just great properties that were trying to wow us with TV. But I got to be honest, for me, the tippy top of that spot is Netflix and Marvel's Punisher. And if you've been following the blog, I wrote an article about my thoughts about one of the particular side characters within the story. But this as a whole was just a really, really well done Marvel Netflix show, because the Marvel Netflix shows have tried very hard to stay grounded in reality and show us street level characters that don't deal with the big world ending threats. They deal with the real crime, like human trafficking and the mafia and corrupt government officials and gangsters, and these kinds of things are, not the best for the big over the top cinematic movies that we've been getting, but they definitely work well in a TV environment. And Punisher just does a great job at telling its story and connecting itself with other things. And I'm going to be honest, the big thing about it is it's really not a slave to those other things. There are subtle references to things that have happened in the past, and there's probably, I've only watched it a couple of times, so I don't remember every single detail, but there's probably a Daredevil or another reference in there to another Marvel Netflix character. But it really feels very self-contained, which is exactly what Punisher should be. I mean, when you talk about the gray areas, Punisher exists in the grayest of the gray. I mean, this man has seen that the law has failed and that criminals will continue to be criminals. Criminals laugh in the face of society's laws, and what they did to Frank is unforgivable. And these are powerful men who got to cover these things up and go on to live their successful lives with no repercussion for their actions. And the Punisher is the person who gives them that repercussion, whether it's crime families, the mafia, bikers, gangbangers, or military people. Frank brings justice to those that constantly elude it and do whatever they want. And that is put to the screen in such an amazing way that if you have not watched the show, I gotta ask, what are you doing with your life? Go watch the show. It is not only a great representation of Frank Castle as a character, but it is beautifully portrayed and brought to the screen by some just fantastic actors. Obviously, John Barenthal is playing Frank Castle, and he's great. I mean, if you liked him in season 2 of Daredevil, you just get more of that. Honestly, for me, what he did with the Punisher was the reason to watch season 2 of Daredevil, and I like Elektra. I'm not with the camp of people who didn't think that Elektra was well done. I think Elektra was done very well, and I enjoyed her portrayal. But Frank is... he's so good, and the way Barenthal plays him makes him such an engaging character. And in the Punisher series, they've introduced us, obviously, to new characters like Micro, who's an old stalemate from the comic world. And truth be told, he gets brought to the screen in quite a different way than he was initially brought to the page. But that doesn't matter, because the role that he serves is still the same, is an ally to Frank, is helping Frank hunt down the bad people that have hurt him, that have taken his family. And they give Micro a motivation in that regard as well. They took Micro's family, not in the same way that they took Frank's, but they definitely did the same thing to him. And it's very heartening to see their relationship build from, Frank's initial distrust of this man to understanding that they share a common enemy, and understanding that Micro is on board with Frank's sense of justice, because Micro is backed into a corner where he believes the only way that justice will be served is to see these men dead. And that's, like I said, that's the grayest of the gray areas. So when you look at what Netflix and Marvel have done, Punisher, I think, stands alone in showing just a really, really dark, adult-oriented, R-rated, if you will, type take on a character that really his story would not work without that setting. Daredevil could work without an R-rated setting. Daredevil could work in a PG-13 setting. I honestly think Luke Cage can definitely work in a PG-13 setting. Iron Fist can definitely work in a PG-13 setting. But Punisher is one of those characters that he cannot. And I think Jessica Jones obviously is on that list as well. She's not a character because of how dark her story is. But I think Punisher is just the darkest of the dark. It's the grayest of the gray areas in the Marvel Universe. That the heroes, the big heroes like Captain America and Thor and Iron Man, often don't notice these things. These things are so far beneath their notice when they're dealing with the world-ending threats. Loki and the alien invasions and robots, and they have bigger fish to fry. So these heroes, I think, have found a great niche, and I really hope they continue to expand the Netflix universe with things like Moon Knight. We had Ghost Rider in ABC's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. with an excellent debut. I mean, honestly, if you've not seen it, they did a great job with Ghost Rider. The CG is not up to par of a movie, but it's pretty good for a television show. And the kid who's playing Robbie Reyes is perfect. And there's even a reference to Johnny Blaze in there. So if you're upset that Johnny Blaze didn't get his time to shine before Robbie Reyes, well, there's a moment. So Johnny Blaze is in the universe. He exists. But that's going to bring us to the end of my best of list. Like I was saying earlier, I would love to hear what you guys think. What were your best of movies, comics, video games, and TV stuff for this past year, 2017, now that it's done? And we can look back objectively and try to make these kinds of decisions. I would love to hear. So if you want to chat with me, hit me up on the email at etgnerdnews@gmail.com. I will try to respond as quick as I can. But man, I'd really love to hear what your guys' best of were. And if you're digging what we're putting down, head on over to entertainthegeeky.com, where we've got the blog and the news articles and the merchandise and the games and all the things that we're trying to bring to you. Check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/entertainmentgeeky, on Twitter at entertaingeeky. And like I said, if you want to chat, shoot me an email at etgnerdnews@gmail.com. We will see you guys next week. Until then, stay geeky.